And would you not do something if it does harm? Even the rapist video thing.
Mm-hmm.
You said you're totally uninterested in this way over there, but you wouldn't make it illegal. But doesn't there need to be a discussion on the question, does it do harm? Does it cause harm? Is it harmful to have something that depicted like that?
Well, I guess the question is harm for whom? Are you suggesting that having these videos made makes people want to go out and rape women? Or, because I mean, the research that's been done and on the correlation between violent pornography and rape has been disproven through multiple studies. So, I mean, it's a good question to ask. Yeah. Let's see. Like what else could have a similar? I guess my argument would be that people could make the argument that there's harm in any of these things. People are currently, to this day in 2011, making the argument that gay people having sex in their house is harmful to the family fabric, to the family unit, that walking around naked in your house was harmful to this woman on his yard. So I guess my argument is that, is there really harm, and should that be the government's place to legislate it?
That's my question, is from a layman's point of view, I would ask the question, and then asking the question needs an answer, but who's answering the question, and who do I trust to give the answer? You just said studies have shown, so that's helpful. So, oh, okay, there's been studies. But I can't just take your word for it and say, oh, don't worry about it, it's not harmful, without having some kind of substantial evidence that it isn't harmful. Like you said, you could argue. But if you can argue, then you have to substantiate that argument one way or the other, and not just say, take my word for it, it's not harmful, or take my word for it, it is harmful. You know what I'm saying?
I do. Another interesting thing where the gets so messy, this is a very messy subject, is for example, the Gardasil shot. Because the argument was made by the opponents of this vaccine, or at least the mandatory vaccination of children, is that it's going to lead children to be promiscuous, and so they did studies of other types of things. They used the same argument, for example, during finding out a cure for syphilis, saying that, well, if now we can cure syphilis, people are going to go have rampant unprotected sex, get syphilis, cure it, and this is going to be the downfall of society there. Now the studies are showing that this is not the case, no more than wearing seatbelts causes people to drive more erratically, but say it did cause more promiscuity. Is that, you know what I mean? So then it becomes dicey of, well, is that a bad thing? Say people get Gardasil shots and they become more reckless sexually. Well, if there's now not harm because they're not getting the thing, or they're not getting the HPV, is there harm? Who's to decide whether teens having lots of sex with no consequences is a bad thing or not? Some would argue, hey, if I was a teenager, I would want to be having good sex too. So, you know, it becomes, again, what's your opinion and who has the right to legislate it? And for me, anyway, it's my kind of research on how oppression works as far as sexuality is concerned. For me, it's been, like I said, it's difficult for me to separate myself, because I am a more liberal-leaning individual, but everybody has their line. And for me, my line was the rape porn. And as hard as it is for me to say, okay, I hate this, but does it need to be legislated? Do people need to sit in prison because they don't hate it? In my opinion, would be no, but I guess everybody has their own. Other questions, comments? Yes.
I have a question. As I'm sure you probably saw, I think it was just a couple months ago, a district in California passed legislation creating a gay history course for high school students and below. Do you think that having such courses nationwide would have any effect on the issue of sexual freedom or sexual oppression?
I think education of any kind can be nothing but good. I think when people know and have the ability to inquire, it leads to nothing but good things. So my guess would be that it would lead to more compassion and tolerance, and it would lead no one to turn gay, if that was the concern. And not that I'm sure that would be a bad thing if it did, but I think any kind of education is, I mean, how could you be anti-education? I don't quite understand, personally. But is that the argument, that they think it would
I think it tends to go along the line of making people or influencing people's sexuality to turn them gay, or that in the general fear of wanting to shield youths from sex at all, or making sure they don't have any awareness, otherwise they'll become sexually active at a young age,
Right.
which then would put an economic burden on the parents as well as a moral supposed burden.
I would say not.
I have a question.
Sure.
For your opinion, how much the Save the Children feeling is due to somebody trying to advance oppression versus culturally induced? I get the feeling in the everyday average person, the Save the Children idea, saves children from being exposed to sexuality, is sort of a gut kind of thing. It was passed on to them by their parents and by the culture. It seems to me that's by far the big elephant there in the room. That's probably not the best metaphor I'm picking that for. But I guess it goes on with my question: how do we change that? How do we convince society? And that's more our society. If you go to Europe, it's not that way. You go down a street in Paris, and your sex shop is multiplied many times over on a street where there are nice cafes and restaurants, people strolling with their children. What is it that we can do in our society to make it more like it's been in European society and other societies for many years? What is it that we're doing wrong? What can we do to improve it?
Fabulous question. I've actually done a lot of research and studying on the matter and studying abroad to kind of look at cross-cultural ways that people look at sexuality in childhood. And for me, that's a question that I asked when actually designing this workshop is this malicious? Is somebody sitting in a room with a cigar being like, how do we get these people into a little hole and no questions so we can rule the world? And I don't know that that's happening. Maybe it is. I don't know. I assume that if you look at the Victorian period, did they really think, like, let's put carbolic acids on 2-year-olds' clitorises, and this sounds like a great idea. And I think that, like many things, you just get wrapped up in what you've been taught and what your neighbor's doing and your friends are doing, and that just becomes part of your culture. I don't think it's innate, as I kind of looked at the history of childhood, is up until 500 years ago, no one gave a crap about children. And, so I think it's definitely not innate to kind of protect children from seeing a guy's penis in his bedroom window. But as far as how it's working in other societies, I mentioned I had to go to college in another country because they don't offer sex degrees here. And so I went to Canada, I also studied in Amsterdam, and kind of the difference I kind of pegged it to was, I don't know if anybody knows much about Amsterdam. Basically, the city is underwater, or would be underwater, and they had to build these kind of dams around the whole city to keep it not flooded. And so it couldn't be this kind of attitude that's typically American of, I worked hard, I've earned mine, if you didn't, sucks to be you, kind of that little chicken rhyme where it's like, I cook the bread, I pick the wheat, now you want to come eat it, no, kind of argument. Whereas they don't have the luxury of doing that, because I could work really hard to make sure my dam is high and strong, but if my neighbor doesn't, water is still coming in and ruining my house. So we need to work together in kind of a pragmatic approach to where we are as a society, and so that kind of has lessened the othering of negativity, I guess. I'm doing a poor job explaining this. So they might say, and they have said, I don't agree with, for example, in Canada, same-sex marriage, or that is legal in at least Ontario. Maybe I don't like it, or I don't think emergency contraceptive pills should be available to teenagers over the counter. But who am I to say that you can't? They have this kind of this. They have this, why am I interjecting mine? And I remember I wrote a sex column when I was in Canada, and I even asked I would do a study. I was doing a little sex column on the difference between sexual mores in Canada and the United States, and I said, how do you feel about, and I asked them all these issues, and they were literally confused about why I would ask. They're like, well, why should it be illegal? Like, who am I to say you can't because I don't like it? So to me, it's a little bit of that. How do we change it? Last part of your question. It's hard. I preach a lot and I talk a lot of stuff, but it's a lot I'll say it's a lot easier said than done. I don't have children. I have a sister who's significantly younger than me, and whenever she asks me about sex stuff, and I'm always like, should I be saying this? Am I giving her permission? So even as I stand up here and I'm doing a PhD in sexuality and I preach these things, there's a voice that came in my head somewhere along the line. I learned it just the same as you all did, being like, that's bad, that's dirty, no, don't teach her that. And it's a constant struggle within oneself. Going back to the book, I write chapters on fighting the crusade against sex within myself and how to try and change at least my little world around me. It's not like it's a struggle and it's work. A great question, thanks.
You brought up a couple things like the mother watching the Grammys with their children and I think the grandfather watching television with his granddaughter and seeing like these commercials. And in both of those cases, and in the case with the mother and daughter walking through someone's yard, the parents are leading their children to the media or to the point at which they're exposed to things that the parents say they don't want their children exposed to. Do you think that if they find it offensive, they have the obligation to protect their children from things that they find offensive?
How would they do the protecting?
Well, like obviously you know that performers at the Grammys are often like portrayed as being promiscuous, and it's not like a secretive thing that Lady Gaga is going to do something ridiculous. Like you could just tell your children, no, you're not going to watch this, you're going to go to bed. Or you could just tell your children, you know what, don't listen to the TV, go play outside or something. You can't just say like, oh, because it's in the media, like my child is going to be exposed to this. And you could say, I'm going to stop my child from being exposed to something as a personal choice, not a legal choice.
I agree with you. It's a privilege to watch television. I don't even know what you would call it, to walk in someone else's yard.
Trespassing.
You know, if you don't, like, it's an argument that people made, like my store situation. It's like, don't go shopping there then if you don't like it. Like, why? It's the question I posed in the beginning of, do you have the right not to be offended, and do you have an obligation not to offend? Or do people have an obligation to insulate themselves and avoid things that they find offensive and let people do what they want to do? So that's it.
I'm just a little bit confused about the chart over there that you made, and I'm trying to make up one for today. So if terrorism is a social fear, how might that be? I know this is maybe hypothetical.
It is. I wouldn't want to stop people to. I mean, maybe that doesn't make a brainstorm.
What you're saying is it can be construed in a way to bring in the to make sex seem bad. Vilify is the word I'm looking for. Sex over any political issue or social fear, so that you get everyone involved and the children. To be honest, it can be a very poor and loose tie-in. They just want to make the tie so that you're thinking sex and get you riled up about it. Like, I would say that Elvis Presley has very little to do with communism, but they were able to make that connection, and so we go, oh my God, he's writing a lot to the FBI saying he's a risk to the security of the United States, because they know that's what is in the conscious mind of the populace, and riling them up with sexuality.